that New Zealanders deserve and expect.
Madam Speaker.
I call the Right Honourable David
Madam
Carter.
Speaker, what a great day for the opposition. And it gets better and better with every government speech. I have never seen a more flat government after the delivery of a budget. Look at the body language on the other side of the House. They know it's a flop. They know it's a flop. And if I could just refer to the Honourable Dr David Clark, because he followed our health spokesperson, the Honourable Michael Woodhouse. Michael Woodhouse said nurses deserve more pay. David Clark interjected, "What a load of rubbish." That's what he said. That's how out of touch that minister is already with his own sector. He's going to get a lot of Dear David letters from now on from nurses right around the country who, when asked whether they need more money, when promised they need more money by a national spokesperson, David Clark says, "What a load of rubbish." I can tell by looking at the government today that they know Grant Robertson has blown it. We've been seeing the commentary from the analysts, from the business community, from NZEI, and they're all saying this budget is a flop. It's a flop, and that rests with one Minister of Finance, Grant Robertson. Madam Speaker, I've been around a few of these budgets, and it's a great day. There's the sense of excitement, the sense of anticipation, but I knew the government was in trouble when Mr Robertson started his speech today. Go back and have a look at it. He spent the first 10 minutes re-announcing what he had announced in his December mini-budget back in December. You cannot keep re-announcing announcements time after time after time and getting away with it. That's what I will remember that speech for. You cannot continue to promise things like a winter energy payment in December and then be back in the House today saying we can't do it in May, but we might be able to do it in July. That's what Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister, said, and I've got a message for her. Do your homework first before you announce a policy. But the other interesting thing about Grant Robertson's speech, how many times was the word Kiwi build mentioned?
Wow.
I can tell you, once. Grant Robertson didn't want to talk about Mr Twyford's promise to build 100,000 new homes because we know it's a Kiwi fail policy. This is a Kiwi fail budget. Mr Twyford is fast becoming persona non grata in the Labor caucus because he's overpromised, and Andrew Little says we love him. Well, he's the only one that says that to me when I talk to his colleagues outside this place. He's the only one who says that to me. I've seen these budget cycles before. If you go back to 1990 to 99, they were difficult years for any government, but when National left government in 1999, the books were sound. And what we saw is the pattern we're seeing now, when Labor will come in and spend their money, throw it around, no effective challenge to their expenditure. Look at the health budget at the time of the government 2000 to 2008. More and more money put into health, less and less operations, Mr McNulty, and more patients in New Zealand going to Australia to be treated. That's the legacy of Labor to 2008. And then we get to the last decade, the government of the national government, and again the economy has been left in a very sound position. So Labor New Zealand First have spent the last couple of weeks saying that we didn't leave enough money in the kitty, and that has been proved to be absolutely wrong. They talked about unappropriated money for health and unappropriated money for education. That's wrong. The problem is Labor over-promised in the election campaign. They don't know how to do budgets. They over-promised and now they can't deliver. So, Madam Speaker, what you see in this budget is what we've seen in every budget I've ever seen delivered by Labor. It's about increasing taxes. It's about increasing spending. It's about borrowing more money and hoping that there's no huge national disasters like earthquakes or Asian financial crisis or global financial crisis that they have to deal with. Increase taxes, spend more money, borrow more money and hope. That's what this government's about. Mr Speaker, having left them in a very sound financial position, let the next Labor Speaker rise to his feet, the Honourable David Parker, and tell this House why borrowing has to go from 56 million to 73 million. Why borrow more money when taxes take is already going up? $2 billion more in tax take than was expected, and that's because a sound economy was left by the previous government. So where's all this additional money going? Well, Labor said in this budget it was about health. And yet we listened to that excellent speech from the Honourable Simon Bridges, and he points out $3.2 billion, the big expenditure item by Labor, is less than National had in its last budget. Madam Speaker, I had a quick look through the media pack, and that's really interesting stuff. The Honourable Claire Curran. We shouldn't laugh, but she is spending $15 million on a ministerial advisory group to advise on how to support contribution of public media to an informed democracy. Does that sound like $15 million? David Parker, the Honourable David Parker, he spends $3.1 million setting up a unit to watch the oversight of the Resource Management Act. The doozy of them all, the Honourable Shane Jones, $1 billion slush fund, and let me tell the Honourable Shane Jones, New Zealanders will see for that like it should. Winston Peters, the Right Honourable Winston Peters, $714 million to the Pacific and official development assistant. I thought New Zealand First used to stand for New Zealanders first. It does not. It does not and did not. And then the best one of the lot, to prove that Right Honourable Winston Peters has the negotiating power, the budget allows $4.8 million over the next 4 years for tax deductions that can be claimed for the cost of high-quality horses acquired with the intention to breed. Well, I've owned a few horses in my day. They were high quality when I bought them. They were dead lost by the time they went to the dog tucker, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this is a shocking budget. I was full of anticipation. I was expecting the government to be able to do a lot better. When I consider the way the speech was delivered by Grant Robinson, it was perfunctory. It's got to be. That's the way Ministers of Finance have to deliver their speech. We then had one of the best opposition leader speeches I've seen in the 23 budgets I've had the opportunity and the privilege to observe. And then we had the Prime Minister. I don't think I've ever seen her more flat in my days. Never seen her more flat in my day. And then we had the Right Honourable Winston Peters delivering his, I think, 20 minutes of, well, it was gibberish, really. I couldn't understand a word of it. Incomprehensible speech. Well, and my friend said it was the most clear he's been in years. Well, no, I've heard him answer and ask a lot of questions in this House. That was a shocking speech from the Right Honourable Winston Peters. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, this budget will go down as a flop. There was a huge opportunity to set a clear agenda, they wasted it. But what this government has done is put a mark on itself, the same as the previous Labor government. It's about raising taxes, spending it recklessly without any regard to the hard-working New Zealanders who pay those taxes. When that runs short, they borrow more money, bring on the next election and let's change it.
I apologise to the member. Your time has expired. I call the Honourable David Parker.
Madam Speaker, poor David